Hi, welcome to Drake Beard's From the Porch to the Trail, and this is our Wednesday Uplift. I just wanted to share something I shared with my church on Sunday. We were in the book of Amos, and Wednesdays we usually have an uplift here, and I thought it was a good message to share with you as well here at Drake Beard, because the truth of the matter is this is an eternal message that really affects each and every one of us. You see, in the book of Amos, he's just this normal, everyday shepherd. And he comes to town to preach to the religious elite, and he comes to town to preach to the king. Now, that would be a pretty scary thing. It'd be like, for those of us in America going to Washington, D.C. to preach against the problems that are going on there. And just imagine how that would go over. I just want us to realize this isn't about politics, but this is about something about us personally. You see, in the midst of all of that, 2 times God says he's going to destroy the northern kingdom of Israel, and both times Amos prays for the people, and he prays to God and says, please relent, we can't survive without you. And so God says, I'm not going to destroy you. But then he has another vision, and it says down in Amos chapter 7 verse 8, he says, what do you see, Amos? And Amos looks and he sees something. He sees something that is not something we use every day, but he sees something that used to be used quite a bit by construction workers. A lot of you know we're remodeling at the church, and we use a lot of levels, and we use hammers and nails and screws, and we use a lot of screws because we're trying to hold everything together, putting windows in and things like that. But along with levels kind of work on this horizontal plane. You're trying to keep everything flat. But when you have a big wall and try to keep it up and down perpendicular, you have to remember that you got to still keep it straight. And so long ago, way back when, in ancient times, they came up with this device called the plumb line. And Amos says he's walking along and he has this vision of God, and he sees this plumb line. God's got this plumb line in his hand. And what he tells Amos is this. He basically says, Amos, I heard your prayers for your people. I'm going to forgive them. I'm going to give them another chance. But here's the deal. This is the plumb line. This is how you got to be straight. Now that really hit me this week, because I look around our world and I see people who lie at work about how many hours they put in. They want the full pay, but they don't want to put in the work. I see people try to cheat the systems. I see people often who go through life cheating on their spouses, lying to their neighbor, all kinds of things that happen. I see people around us doing so many things. And then I look at my own life and I say, where am I at? Because I do believe God gave us a plumb line. And whether we like it or not, he gave us this measuring stick so we could measure up to being a better person. And that measuring stick is the Bible. That measuring stick is his word. And there are 10 commandments that we can memorize, and many of us probably did as kids, and some of us may not know them. But I think we can remember 2 things, because Jesus says they're summed up in 2 things. Number 1, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and spirit. Love God above all else. So Jesus tells us it comes down to 2 things. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and spirit, and love your neighbor as yourself. And I always like to remind people, because a lot of people read the Bible and they get this idea that God's just this God of vengeance and he's out to destroy the people because they don't do what he wants and he only wants them to worship him. He does only want our worship. But Jesus says it's about loving God and loving our neighbor. And those are the 2 things that they weren't doing in Amos's time. They weren't showing respect to God because they'd allowed themselves to worship false gods. And they weren't loving their neighbor because they weren't caring for them. They were charging them extra credit. They weren't forgiving loans and forgiving property loans like they were supposed to every 7 years. That's the way their system was supposed to work under God's plan, that people would keep their land and their family would keep it. Instead, they were abusing the system and they were hurting people and they weren't caring for the poor. And I look at my own life and I look at our lives and I say, are we measuring up? Jesus once told his followers they got to be as righteous as the Pharisees, the most righteous amongst them. Do what they say, but not what they do, because they didn't even follow their own rules. But are we measuring up? Are we walking the line? That's the challenge this week. I hope God blesses you on your journey, and I hope you can join us for another edition of our podcast, From the Porch to the Trail. And I hope you've enjoyed this Wednesday Uplift. God bless you. Bless others along the journey.